Digital Detroit, Thinking Space as Network. Jeff Rice proclaims that Detroit as a network is a deviation from Detroit as the supposed problematic city that most narratives reinforce. The images I'm using here create exactly the grand narrative Rice means, and my goal is to depict the Detroit that has dominated media for the past decade, and the one that Rice deliberately writes away from, so the counter-narrative will hopefully stand out. The images that make up Detroit's grand narrative are an amalgamation of pleas for the audience to accept Detroit as a troubled but resilient landscape with the potential for resurrection, in spite of its reputation as a dilapidated, faltering, and dangerous place. Rice says that he never felt that way in thinking Detroit's space as a network. Furthermore, he claims, quote, repeating the narrative of these conditions has done little to change the city's problems since their legitimacy is based on one perspective located in one space. In other words, it's a vicious rhetorical cycle in which agents, planners, politicians, citizens, observers want to address real problems, but they only do so by repeating the problem's totalizing position, unquote. Instead, Rice seeks to open up the city's network rhetoric, rather than fix its rhetoric as a topos of devastation. To do this, he relies on several premises, including the counterpart to taxonomy, folksonomy, which he defines as the new media method of categorizing information according to desire, taste, personal interest, communal knowledge, and so on. Folksonomy is what makes up the network he illustrates, all the Twitter, Yelp, and Google posts by real people communicating their real experiences of Detroit. Even though the appeal of the network is by no means new, Rice's use of it in Detroit is innovative and fascinating. To consider both the physical and the digital in terms of a collection of individuals as the makers of identity is both liberating and terrifying. Relinquishing control over an image is something we all have to come to terms with, because we have stakes in not only our own image, but also the images of those people and places dear to us. As Rice points out, quote, the importance of the network is not the information that information connects, but rather that the connections affect other connections, unquote. These connections accrete meanings over time, the more people add their voices to the network. This prospect is one that Paul Virilio dreads, but Rice embraces. Virilio wants signifieds to stop and stand still and have a reasonable number of meanings when such a thing is just not going to happen on the internet. Mobility of meaning can be frustrating, but it cannot be controlled, so banging one's head against the wall trying to control it is fruitless. For Rice, the network's flexibility and the privileging of the individual within it is something to be noted, celebrated, and utilized. But what are we supposed to do with it? Yes, we're all bound up in the digital spaces, and we have the ability to modify the network, which is great and all, but the real big picture here is that the personal matters, a claim which science has sought to deny since the Enlightenment. Scientific thinkers want capital T truth and absolutes and perfect clarity to order our chaotic existences. They forswear bias and strive for objectivism. If there is a contradiction, we must account for it or stamp it out. But this mindset is horribly unrealistic and creates the illusion of an ordered universe. It is far more productive to accept the complex, meaningful universe, one which includes each individual in a network of physical and digital ecologies. And problems definitely arise when a person can't see themselves as part of the network. Rice brings up William Bunge's objection to the lack of community participation among the university professor population, which is indeed a problem. If the educated elite are not actively engaged in their topos, they will be disconnected from the network and unable to enact the changes they themselves consider necessary. When I taught at Lander University and community service was an essential part of my professional development, for my annual evaluation I was required to serve on some kind of community council or committee and to volunteer regularly outside the university. Failure to do so would result in an unfavorable review and could cause my career to stall. I imagine something of the kind is required of professors across the country, and probably too in the institutions where Rice worked, but even requirements such as these can't force someone to connect in a meaningful way. It should be the ethical duty of every professor to use their knowledge and abilities to benefit their communities. Whether they actively connect or not, members of any community create a space's core just as much as they impact the corresponding topos, and this happens through rhetoric as much as through any other means. The memories, impressions, and narratives associated with a place define it, just as the narratives we tell about ourselves define us. The many attempts to, quote, re-story Detroit, through social programs, advertisements, and commercials, demonstrate the power of rhetoric to recreate self-image and be a catalyst for change. Telling ourselves a new story changes our corresponding cora, which can then, so the hope goes, change the topos for the better. But this process has many layers, and the personal is primary because what is an anecdote without the personal, after all? The place is not simply a place, but an avenue, an artery for meanings that are assembled by individuals. Rice makes a point of saying that while it may feel that the network is utterly egocentric because of its reliance on the personal, it's actually quite communal because of all the various voices that are heard. And the identities are always changing, whether those of the individuals sharing their opinions and experiences, or those of the places, spaces, and topoi with which they concern themselves. All identities are in flux, a solution to the problem of the tar baby of Detroit's, or any place's, grand narrative. Rhetorical values are clearly shifting from a worship of the absolute and a separation of everything into categories championed by Plato and Aristotle, to a more open, fluid understanding of the various disciplines, which ought to be undepartmented from each other interdisciplinarily, and their interrelationships with everything outside the ivory tower. Rice's work alongside Ulmer's and Vitanza's are illustrative of that shift, and that's an important one for us who are going forward in our careers as rhetoricians to observe and become a part of, hopefully.